Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the Women Leading Show, episode 2 of series 2, and I'm delighted to be here as your main host today in Joe Baldwin Scott's place. My name is Jo Sumner. I'm one of the regular co-hosts, and joining us is Kim Adele, fantastic, amazing leadership entrepreneur. Say hi, Kim.
Hey, lovely. You okay?
Yes, all good. And then we have a fabulous co-author guest from the Women Leading book, Janelle Mansfield, joining us all the way from
Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Yeah, welcome. And then we also have the fantastic Johnny Jensen, who I'll be interviewing for us later from Team Superdad. Hi, Johnny.
Hello, ladies. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
It's a pleasure. So we're going to be talking today about one of the things that we think is most important in the development of your leadership, but also actually just in life altogether. So one of my real passion projects at the moment is working with care leavers to help them build a successful life and really to take people from who they report themselves as only surviving and taking them all the way to thriving. And one of the components of that is finding your role model. So today it's about role models and about those people who lift us up and take us to the next level. So the first thing I'd love to do is hand over to Kim to tell us about a role model, somebody who's had that important place for you.
Oh wow, there's been so many. I've been so fortunate throughout my life to keep meeting people who are willing to sponsor me and to share their insight. And I think for me, it's been invaluable. It's one of the main ways that I managed to make it from hairdresser to C-suite. I wouldn't have done that without the kindness of people that sponsored you and mentored you and shared their knowledge. And I think there's so many, so knowing which ones to mention, but two that really stand out for me are Paul Stobart and Sean Astley Stone, and their ability to really see the best in people and to lend people their belief. And I think for me, that's probably been my biggest learn, which is the greatest gift you can give somebody is to lend them your belief in them at a time when they haven't got any belief of their own, because it's amazing what that can do. And I've been privileged to have people lend me their belief. And I now do my best to make sure that I pass that on.
I think that's a really important point. It's something that I often share with my coaching clients or indeed I offer them to borrow my belief until they found that belief in themselves. So I really recognize that. What about you guys? Janelle, Johnny, somebody that really stands out for you as an amazing role model. We'll come more into your authorship in a minute, but just that person who just, leaps to the top for you. Janelle, we'll go to you first.
I've used a little bit of a different approach, especially in the last, 5 to 7 years of my career as I've been working on developing very specific skills. And that's where I seek someone out who has that specific skill, who exemplifies it. And I try to see what they're doing, learn from them on that specific skill level, because we all have something to learn from everybody. And I just love to find one thing from kind of colleagues or mentors or whoever it is that I'm interacting with, whether it's a client possibly, and just pick that one thing, focus on that, learn from them as best I can. A couple of the areas that I've worked on using that approach has been confidence. I think that's one of the biggest ones for me. Is at different points in my career, I've struggled with confidence. Maybe there's been something unexpected that's happened, and I've looked for confidence role models, and I've really found that approach works really well.
Nice.
It's a great approach.
Yeah, I love the specificity of that, actually. That's really cherry picking who exactly you want to learn from. I love it. Johnny, how about you?
Well, great question. And role models, around Team Superdad, around kind of my love of sport, you get people, the idea of role models comes up in the media quite a lot, and not every footballer wants to be a role model or necessarily leaves themselves in that space. But certainly for me, of the experience of losing my mum when I was a kid, I ended up having lots of people who perhaps wouldn't have taken on that parenting role with me take a more prominent position in my life. And there's a couple in my family who I call my kind of American mum and dad. And Rob, he interestingly, when I was a baby, my mum and dad left me at my Auntie Barbara's house, and Rob taught me to walk. So when he was 16 and I was 0, he taught me to walk, much to my mother's annoyance as I ran into her arms, having missed my first steps. But throughout my life, throughout my teenage years, I would spend each summer there with Rob, and his children are that little bit younger than me. So I felt his parenting to me as a teenager. I saw his parenting to his young children. There's their mum and dad, Irish and American. So there's a mix of, particularly on the Irish, the strength of family there. And then added to that, the American kind of gung-ho, the American dream, get out there and go for it. But I just so often am teaching my kids things that I got from Rob. And just last week, my boy, he had a trial at district level football. And at the end of it, he was the only kid that went, and he can't shake hands at the moment, but he was the only kid that went and did the elbow with the coach and said, "Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it." It might look a bit kiss ass, but the reality is, out of 60 kids, that coach knew, "Hi, I'm Jago Jensen. Thanks for having me today." So when he goes down that list, if one name's going to stick out, there's a greater chance that it will be him. So, it's so powerful for me to be able to talk about that role model and actually see it coming out in my children back to me now. So yeah, of all the many I could mention, Rob O'Connor is definitely one of my most treasured role models.
Oh, wow. What an amazing story.
Johnny, I love how you brought the personal side of role models into this, and our personal lives and our professional lives, they meld together. And I can think of some of my greatest skill improvements, I guess you could say, in my professional life have actually come from leveraging a role model in my personal life. And so there's that strong connection, especially when we think about leadership skills. So many of those leadership skills are soft skills that we learn right from when we were a child, or in my case, maybe have to unlearn from when we were children.
Yeah. So many bosses try to boss their staff, and you could never say, "Oh, I'm going to parent that that person." But actually that empathy, that compassion, that a desire to raise someone up is much more about being a parent as a boss than a boss as a boss. And I think that if you're wondering, how could I be a boss that my team love and respect? People might feel awkward about putting that love word in there, but respect, fine. I love you. I love the word love, so I'm going to throw that in there as well. But I can think about some of the bosses, role models in my life, and it's the ones I didn't like were the ones that tried to boss me. The ones that I do remember fondly are the ones that nurtured and supported and encouraged me, as well as telling me off sometimes as well.
I love that. That's so resonates. I often say to people that I learned more about leadership in the last 3.5 years since I became a mum than I did in the previous 25 years, because you see that determination on their little face when they're wanting to learn something, and the compassion you have to give them when they get it wrong as they're going through. And it's really helped me have some more challenging conversations with colleagues as a result. But Jo, how about you? What role models have you got?
Well, one of the ones that comes to mind for me is also a personal life role model. And I really credit this man with teaching me how to think for myself. So I was one of those people who was academically bright and in a very small school. So it was very easy for me to excel academically because they hothoused me to some extent. And I went to university, and in my first degree, really had just was brilliant at regurgitating the information that I read in books. So I could write you the most erudite essay where some people say this, some people say that, and then not be able to draw a conclusion. So in the first degree, that's how far I got. In the second degree, right towards the end of that degree, one of my professors, his name is Professor Michael Silk, said to me, "Will you just stop?" And I said, I'm so grateful to him for his blunt talk. "Will you just stop with this and actually develop an opinion of your own?" So second time round, I went away, and I was quite shocked. I went away and I did all this work on T.S. Eliot, which is the subject of my dissertation. And I came back, and it was the most incredible moment to have this man, this professor who'd worked in that field for 40 years, say, I have never had this thought before. Well done. That was just the most brilliant role model moment for me. So I still have to remind myself sometimes, take the time to actually discover what you think about something. But that stayed with me. You know, that was a real pivotal moment. I actually felt I got educated in that moment, whereas before that I was just really, really good at learning things by rote, really not actually learning to think. So I think that's one that stands out for me, just absolutely brilliant. So Professor Michael Silk, King's College London University, I still remember you.
Love it.
So shall we get into some of the author stuff this good juicy stuff we've got for you? Kim, you were going to introduce Janelle.
I was. So it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to introduce you all to the fabulous Janelle Mansfield, who is a CX evangelist and expert, and just an all right and amazing lady that I always love chatting to. So Janelle, we'd love to hear a little bit more about your part of the leading women leading book and a little bit about your journey, please.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kim. It's been so great getting to know both Kim and Joe over the last number of months as we've worked together collaboratively on the Women Leading book. The content that I put together for that book was really completely unexpected. I had a different idea in mind, and when I sat down to write it, there was just this, I felt compelled to share a really personal story that I hadn't really talked about a lot. And that was through all about my leadership journey through the last 10 years or so of my life. You know, from hearing some really surprising feedback that was really disturbing and distressful to myself, and that journey to take that feedback, accept it, and then work through the process of overcoming it. And really, the feedback I'd received was that I was a bully, I was very direct, and that I was hurting people's feelings with my leadership style. And I alluded to earlier in the conversation this concept of unlearning behaviors, and that's what I had to do. I had all sorts of preconceived notions of what leadership was early on that I learned ever since I was a little girl, and throughout school and then through university and even through the first number of years of my career that I had to unlearn. And that was really difficult to tackle that. And so my content or my chapter is all about that story.
And it is an amazingly brave and courageous story. I've read it numerous times and love how much you're owning that feedback and went to work on it. You know, a lot of people, when they're given some feedback that's distressing, they don't do anything with it, do they? They don't take those tough looks at themselves and make the change. And yet you don't show up that way. You know, you've taken it on board and work tirelessly to make sure that you unlearnt all of that and have developed a new leadership style. But what has been probably the biggest eureka moment you've had on your journey?
Well, one that stands out for me, actually I have two that kind of stand out. One is about feedback and how you ask for feedback, because I would ask for feedback and I never got it, you know. And so then I was at this, actually it was a mentorship session a number of years ago, and the speaker taught us this little trick about you ask for feedback and then you ask the question again, but you position it as, I really want to know, even if you think it's going to hurt my feelings, what is the piece of feedback that you're sitting there wanting to share with me but are too afraid? And that really starts to open up the conversation between the two of you and starts to get to the heart of what you really need to focus on or improve on. And so that's something that I've started using over the last number of years. That's been really helpful to get that feedback so you can improve, because people are afraid to share the brutal truth.
Absolutely. What a great way of positioning it, because it is one of the challenges, isn't it? You know, none of us want to hurt or offend other people. And, you know, I think people don't try and get things wrong. It's not their intention. They don't start out to go, I wonder how to really get this badly wrong or to upset somebody. So what tends to happen with feedback is we defend our intention rather than our impact, because we explain what it was we were trying to do, rather than what actually happened. But that sounds like an amazing way of actually really opening it up to say, tell me what my blind spots are. Tell me where I get in my own way, because we all have those blind spots, don't we?
Absolutely. And that kind of leads into my second eureka moment. Was not too long ago, a couple of years ago, with my my last boss, Kevin, and saying to me that, Janelle, perception is reality. So however someone else is perceiving your behavior or your directness or your ideas or whatever it is, however they perceive it is their reality. And that was a bit of an aha moment, because I would try to defend or explain my intentions, things like that. And I wouldn't accept how other people were feeling in the moment. And so that was a bit of an aha moment for me, where it's really changed how I approach people and how I approach difficult conversations.
I love it. Another great bit of advice. I always say that perception, like possession, is 9/10 of the law. If we believe it to be true, it's true, isn't it? But it can be a tough one to learn that.
I just want to bring Johnny in to see if, Johnny, do you have a question for Janelle? Or I wonder what that raised for you.
I'm looking at Janelle and wondering what kind of bullying she used to get up to. Up against the filing cabinet. Give me your lunch.
Go ahead.
No, go on. If you're going to answer that question, then great.
I was just going to say, because a lot of women do struggle with this. I'm a strong D, which in the DISC world is I'm a very direct and dominant communicator. And that works well in a largely male-dominated environment. But in a largely female-dominated environment, or whenever you're interacting with women, I find it doesn't work so well. And I had to learn that, and I learned it the hard way. And that was where I was getting that feedback, was I was just really direct. I wasn't demonstrating empathy. I wasn't giving people the chance to share their thoughts or ideas or take time on the floor. And it's something that I've had to really work on toning down, and I still work on it. I think a true D is always going to struggle with this. Even like emails, I have to take a lot of time to sit down and write it consciously, reread it, step away, come back. But that's what it's all about, is it's my communication style. And I think there's a lot of us out there that can relate to that, either being on the receiving end of a D or being a strong D communicator.
And do you think either do you think, or have you consciously tried to, as well as understand that and lean their way, have you with your teams ever said, listen, we need to be a bit more open with each other, we need to take some blunt feedback, so allow the space for more honest communication, perhaps without people taking it as they're done something wrong, or they're not as good, or they're adding meaning to it all?
Absolutely. But that was after I became aware of what was happening. Before I knew, it was a blind spot for me. I had no idea. Like, when I say it, to get the 360-degree feedback and see in the comments the word bully was so shocking. Like, I thought I was doing everything right, because all the feedback I'd received from everybody up until that point was that I was. But I wasn't asking my team members or my employees or my staff the questions before. I was always getting feedback from, leaders or bosses who were seeing my results, but they weren't seeing how I was interacting with other people as much. So,
and that's two sides of the same hand, isn't it? It's strong leader, bully, strong leader, bully. And fine. But if you don't know, that's like taking your leadership skills from work home to your wife. I mean, that's a real challenge, particularly in a traditional sense of family setups. People going home and trying to be the boss at home is not going to work, really, is it? So having that self-awareness is so powerful.
I've found Janelle's story really incredibly impactful, actually. And also I recognized parts of it. When I used to work corporately, I used to get the word intimidating. In fact, I've had that all through my life. And I wondered, I could never understand what was it that was intimidating about me, because I regard myself as one of the least intimidating people you could ever meet. And so I began to ask a couple of the people who'd said it, who, in my language, and this is probably about to give the game away, a bit more robust. So people who I could ask to defend their opinion that I was intimidating. I think it's hilarious that that's the way I went about it, but it is. And it was that the thing that I did actually when under stress. So when not under stress, being a very inclusive communicator, being a very inclusive leader, but under stress, becoming far more directive, short. You know, I remember celebrating one day with one of these professors I used to work with, that we had an exchange where there was nothing other than a subject line. So it was literally just a subject line, and he responded with just a subject line, and we were like, yay, go us, we've got this communication art down. And it really makes me smile now, because I do something so completely different and am almost a different persona. But it might be something for a viewer to think about. If they're getting that sort of feedback, is this something that I do consistently, and it's a communication style altogether that I'm going to need to work on, and how can I do that? Or is this something that particularly happens under stress, in which case I need to be looking at what the stresses are and how I manage them? So I wanted to throw that out there before I switch us over to talking to Johnny. So thank you so much, Janelle. You just are so inspiring. And also I'm so excited to give a little note that our Audible version of the Women Leading book is about to come out. And today I listened to your chapter, and it is brilliant hearing it in your own voice. It is so worth it. So we're so excited, guys. Keep an eye on the Women Leading Facebook page for when the audiobook is available. It is really, really good. And it brings something else, because you can hear each of us telling our story in our own voice. I think you connect with it slightly differently. So Johnny, Team Superdad. What I want to share about Johnny by way of introduction is he doesn't know this. He doesn't know that he happens to be leading a support organization for dads, which is one of the things that I think is the most important in the world, because I have in my life some dads who've really, really struggled with this idea of what on earth does it mean to be a modern man, with this sort of balance that men are somehow supposed to be able to achieve. And I think sometimes a feeling of I have to be everything to everyone, which is fine when you're managing well. But as soon as the stresses get too much, or one piece of the puzzle collapses, can cause real mental health issues. I think I'm just going to go straight there. Real mental health issues. And a particular worry at the moment, of course, is the high suicide rates among men. So Team Superdad is an organization that Johnny runs really to support dads in this area. Johnny, what would you like to tell us about what you do first?
Yeah, thanks. That's awesome awesome introduction. Thank you. I think there's so much I could say, and obviously I'm going to keep it in the time of the show. But you hit on some really important points there. The role of men in the world today is just becoming so lost. It infuriates me when you're watching kids' TV. More often than not, this is ironic considering that this used to be what they used to do to women on TV. The man is either some bumbling fool, or he's some like high-powered super boss making loads of money, like epic flipping machine. You know, there's not really a space in the middle for everyday men, everyday dads. Then you've got across the media the importance of women's equality. You know, you get a lot of women who openly like to describe themselves as I'm a feminist, which is actually quite intimidating to a lot of men, because you know, you don't get men going around saying I'm a misogynist. And I know that feminism is a completely different thing, but most people don't really know what the word feminist means. So it kind of like, oh, and then instantly you go, well, I have no idea what I'm going to say to this person now, because that's what she said. And so there's like this real lostness for everyday men. And the other factor about that, and this is an important part of Team Superdad, and you know, to really reinforce that the super part of Team Superdad is not something I want dads to become, right? It's something that pretty much most good dads, most good guys, people that are interested in finding something like Team Superdad already feel that's what they're doing. They just don't know if it's enough, or they just don't know quite what they're going to do with it. And so you can have men who are really great at work, but they find it hard to communicate with their kids. Is it because they don't love their kids? Well, probably because their dad didn't talk to them very much. They're two very different things. You can have a super fit and healthy dad who can't make any money, and he doesn't understand why that is. And so a men's group, you know, a community of men who are coming together, some of them are saying, oh, I really want some help in this area. Others are saying, I really want to hang out with some like-minded dads, because I live in a town or a city where I can't really find people who are like this. I want to talk about how much I love my wife and how much I want to hang out with my kids. And the rest of them are talking about football and getting drunk and you know, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it comes back to that point that this kind of good guy in the middle is a bit lost as to what he can be. Can I be masculine? Can I not like order my wife around, but can I come home, tell her we're going out for dinner, tell her to get dressed nice, tell her she looks hot, and kind of drag her by the arm and go out? Like that. I don't mean like drag her by the hair and go. I mean like completely take charge of the situation and say, I love you. I'm going to do something awesome for us tonight. And there's a power there. There's a masculinity in that, which, take everything else away, should be attractive to women. And quite often, and I can speak kind of on personal experience in this, when men try and do too much for their women start to lose their attraction for that person. There's an edginess about masculine and feminine roles, and I think there's a flip side to it as well. And I hope I'm not stepping out of line here, but as a man, I want to see my wife looking hot. You know, I do have my head turned when I'm walking down the street. There is something absolutely stunning about women looking great. And so there's like a new dynamic that needs to evolve. There's a new definition of what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman that needs to come along. And somewhere in amongst all that, there needs to be the space that it says it's okay to be a woman, just like the traditional sense of woman, and it's okay to be traditional sense of man, but we just now bring a modern context to it. And so dads talking about mental health and suicide and stuff, when you're trying to keep all these balls juggling in the air, when things start to go a bit wrong, then you really lose sense of who we are. You go and do the shopping and you get home and she says, well, why have you bought that? Well, I was going to buy cereal, so I bought these cereal. Well, they don't like that. So they don't mean, say they, right? The man doesn't mean to be undermined, but he tried his best and it wasn't enough. So now he's like, oh. And strong women, the rise of sort of strong women, or the place for strong women is wonderful, but there's no one shouting about what that means for the man on the other side, and maybe not even enough. Maybe women aren't shouting about that enough as well. It's very easy to go Me Too movement and abusive men or dads that are absent. It's very easy for the media to grab hold of that, but it is getting better. It is getting better, but the media need to start going about like, there's a lot of good guys out around and this is why we love them. There's a lot of good dads out there and this is why their kids love them, and start to celebrate men as much as women are being celebrated at the moment.
It's such an interesting balance to get, isn't it? Because I think some people would respond by saying the pendulum has been swinging so far the other way that in order for it to right itself and come back to the middle, it's swung the other way, which is now very much focused on the feminine, and then coming back to the middle. There are some voices out there, and I really, really appreciate your honesty with this, and you're coming on this show to be that open and vulnerable and to be a role model yourself in the way that you've just spoken. Because I think you have managed that really beautifully. I'm somebody who had a 25-year relationship, with my childhood sweetheart, whom I adored. I still adore him. But where I think we had that combination of not quite finding the right balance of the roles in the relationship, I was probably the one who was trying to do boss at work, boss at home. I can say that now, even though my motivation was so deeply, I wanted to do everything I could for this man who I adored, but it didn't always communicate itself in that way. And because I have the ability to express myself very strongly, I know at times he found it very difficult to know how to be what you've described slightly more as that traditional man. He wanted to show his strength. It's not that he didn't have strength, and he wanted to show his strength, but it was difficult to see how, when I could be like, whoosh, just straight across it with some sharp comment. So since that relationship, which I honestly thought was forever, came to an end about 3 years ago, I've been on a really conscious journey of, I don't want to repeat that. I don't want to break something. And actually, I'm not saying I'm solely responsible for our relationship breaking down, because I'm not. But I did want to own my bit of it and to be able to do better. And so I went out deliberately to find people who were teaching about this. And just in case it's of interest to anybody else, where this particular issue is coming up, there is this most amazing love and intimacy coach called Jay Diamond, some of whose work I then engaged with and followed. And it's one of the things that she talks about the most, which I think is really challenging and yet yields amazing result, which is the ability to stand back, the ability as a woman to be able to stand back and let a man step into that strength, and to let a man actually do that, yanking by the arm rather than the hair out the door. Come on, we're going to go and do this. We've had this amazing week. We've both achieved so much. It's time to go and celebrate. Just put that down. So there are people out there, but there's maybe not enough. And I guess that was my reflection on what you shared. Kim, Janelle, was there anything that you wanted to jump in on or ask?
Sorry, I was only waiting in case we both talked at the same time, so forgive me. I think for me it's an interesting debate for everybody, isn't it? Because I think what we would need to be able to do is celebrate everybody for being who they are. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, the media prefers to focus on the negative side. And actually what we look for is what we find. So if we look for things that are discriminatory, we're going to find them. If we look for things that are inclusive, we will find them. And it's how do we change the dialogue so that we are all looking for the positives, because that's going to be, I think, what works best for everybody.
Yeah, here's the scary thing about that, right? With the divorce rate at sort of 50%, you've and the toxic nature of separated partners, there's a real danger that another generation, I should say, are going to grow up with a slanted view on what men are, what dads are, what husbands are, and the same in respect to women, mothers, girlfriends, that feminine partner to have in our life. And this is when I launched Team Superdad, I had a strong focus on single dads, and I've two reasons I dropped that was, one, a good friend of mine's wife said, don't you think you're just going to end up stuck in that subject forever? And I was like, oh, maybe I will. And that's not my commitment. My commitment is to fall in love, have a new relationship, and still work towards that vision. I'm a bit of a sucker for the Disney movie, the Waltons Disney happy endings, like bring it home, forever, ever. But I do believe that's possible, to find that life partner. And the important thing just about this relationship thing is that in separation is that the children's courts, just society as a whole, needs to start to recognize that separation is okay, that a new chapter can come out of this. In no other walk of life can you despise someone simply because of what happened last week, whether it be a boss, a doctor, a bus driver, whoever. We have to find a way to get along, and particularly if we've made children with that other person. So I could talk about this for hours, but just at a basic level, you know, we have to remember that the impression, the message we're giving our children, even after separation, is so important. And to just honor, going back to that point about honoring what it is to be dad, what it is to be mum, so that we are teaching our children. It goes back to role models, blimey. So that we are teaching our children who I am to my wife, to my ex-wife, is who my children will be to their wife, and hopefully not their ex-wife. But if it goes that way, I want them to do it in the right way. And this whole kind of deadbeat dad and men are all bastards, you know, like, that just has to stop. And inside there's too many single parent communities, that is still the narrative. And obviously dads fighting to see their children as well as another challenge, but it needs to be made unacceptable in society, like drink driving, like pinching a woman's bum, like, you know, like all these things. It needs to become unacceptable, really, for separated people to war for the rest of their lives.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because that's really asking the question of, or looking at all the different areas of society that would need to change for that to happen. And one of the things that I think is a positive step on that front is the introduction of no-fault divorce without waiting the 2-year period. I think that's actually a really important step on that. I'm mindful of time and of wanting to just begin to hone, if you like, you know, bring the show together and really think about what we want people to take away as our core message. And I wonder whether it is worth just each taking a moment to think, what's the one thing that you would like people to take away from our conversation today? Just a 1 or 2 sentence. And for me, I have one, and then I'll pass on. So for me, I think you can take responsibility for finding a role model. And that's one of the things that I want to share with the care leavers, or I do share with the care leavers that I work with, is you don't have to wait for them to show up, because they don't have access to often to really solid family relationships. Often it's quite dysfunctional or just absent. So you can take responsibility for it and actively go out and find people. So Johnny, you had an idea you wanted to share with us.
Yeah. So I am a role model to my children, to the Team Superdad community, to my neighbors. You know, like, I am a role model. People are often feel under pressure about that, taking that on, right? But the pressure comes from feeling that they can't then fail, they can't then make a mistake. It's really important that people step into being a role model and accept that they will make mistakes. It's then how we deal with those mistakes that honor ourselves as a role model. How would I, like, what am I trying to give off to these people? If I made a mistake, what would I want them to do if they made a mistake? And when I think back to my childhood, I would get told off for things and my dad wouldn't explain why I'd been told off. So I always look to explain to my children, this is what's happened, this is what's gone, what's happened, you know, why you're getting told off. And if I do something, like if I've sworn at them, like, you know, I'll then say later on in the day, I swore at you this morning, it wasn't acceptable, that's not my commitment to you as my children, I'm sorry for it, you know, I do love and respect you. So it's knowing what you want to be as a role model, accepting that you can make mistakes, and then recommitting to that role model position.
I'll go next. Sure. So I guess my core message would be, as you grow through your journey, your leadership journey, or your personal development journey, whatever you want to call it, and you identify what you want to work on, think about who in your life you can watch to learn from them and to emulate. We use the term role model, and we kind of have built it up like it's something really big and it has to be somebody who's famous or well known, but look closer to home. There's role models all around us, and there's stuff that we can learn from everybody that we interact with.
Definitely.
I love all of those. So very true. I mean, I think everybody we meet, comes into our life as either a lesson, a blessing, or both. And when we can view it that way, then life becomes a much nicer place for all of us. And I guess for me, the thing to always remember is we never know what the other person's going through. So act always with kindness, because it might just be the kindness they need.
I think that's a really beautiful place to begin to draw things to a close. To say thank you so much to Janelle and to Johnny for joining us and for sharing so openly and being such excellent role models. I really take on board what you've shared. And then for our viewers, our next episode will be on the 6th of November, and we have two of our Australian co-authors from the Women Leading book joining us that time. So that's Dimpna Kennedy and Dave Clare. So very much looking forward to that. Thank you so much for joining us today. And that's us done. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks.